Ellen Schoeck is a longtime Edmontonian, originally from New York, but been in Edmonton for a very long time, has been long time associated with the U of A. She's a historian. She's a writer of 5 books about the U of A. The 5th book is set to be published very soon. She's a longtime administrator and ombudsperson for the U of A. And I was just super excited when she was available to talk to us about this subject that she's intimately connected with. And she was willing to spend some time putting a presentation together for us, really timely. It's still not decided what's going to happen to these ring houses. People feel very strongly about it. And I'm just super interested to hear her insights on this very apropos debate. So Ellen, I'm going to pass it over to you.
So hi, everybody. I want to thank Karen for the invitation, Marilyn for a lot of support to put this on. And I also want to thank the University of Alberta archives. You're going to see a number of pictures from those archives. And today what I want to do is to try and humanize the ring houses for you. Certainly the houses have intrinsic historic value, architectural value, but there were people who lived in those houses. Some of the stories I've known for a number of years, but there are several I have just found out in the last week or two with people writing to me. I think because of the op-ed that was in the Edmonton Journal, the Spanish flu webinar, there was a CBC spot. And if this latest book happens to get reprinted, I'm going to add an appendix with pages of stories that people have told me about the ring houses. So I also want to talk briefly at the beginning about Alumni House and the Faculty Club. So Alumni House was built in 1961 to house the more modern presidents. And when Meyer Horowitz was named president, he said, I already have a house, so what can we do to use this house for other purposes? And indeed, it served many other purposes over its lifetime. Now, I was told that Alumni House was demolished in the middle of the night and apparently sodded in the middle of the night. So the morning after, if you walk by, you would probably just see a green space. And I think there are many people, I've been told, there are many people in Windsor Park who are just waking up to the fact that there's no longer an Alumni House. The Faculty Club was built in 1964. The architect was John Rule. And if you don't know his name, you should Google him. That's part of your homework. Okay, so because that house, that structure was designed by a famous Edmonton architect. You're also going to see me looking to your right, my left, because I won't see the screens previewed. So I'll be just looking here to the left. I also want to say that if you're not aware, there are universities such as UBC and the University of Calgary, which have land trusts. And the long and the short of that is that UBC, for instance, has built a string of beautiful condos around the rim of its campus. And therefore it has an independent revenue source from a government grant and from tuition. And with this government grant that the U of A has just gotten, that may be a factor in what we see happening. The University of Calgary, I'm told, built a mall through their land trust. The U of A has a land trust. It's had it for since Ralph Young was chancellor 3 or 4 chancellors ago. So just think about the setting of Alumni House, the ring houses, and the University Club. It's prime Riverview land. So with respect to the Faculty Club, I know that their lease has been extended to 2030. I believe there used to be an automatic renewal clause in there. I don't know if that's still in there. The ring houses I've worried about for 20, 25 years. So Norma, not going back to your time, but shortly thereafter, I used to say to university presidents and provosts, don't let them go to rack and ruin and then say we can't afford to keep them. And but there's a new administration, there's a new time. I would say I'm hopeful. There are a lot of people working in the background. I go through the petition every other day or so, and write an update for the chancellor. 3 of us met with the chancellor. There are a lot of talks going on in the background. So we'll just have to wait and see. And I think we need to be vigilant about the University Club. So here we go. So first slide, Marilyn. Now, this gentleman is Reg Lister. That's young Reg on my left, and an older Reg, probably about 1950 on the right. He came from England in 1910 and ended up at the U of A in 1911 as a laborer. And for 15 cents an hour, he helped to dig the basement of Ringhouse 1. And I'll just tell you, of all the research I've done over 20 some odd years, he is the one person I would name as having had the most influence over generations of students. And I also want to talk briefly about my books, which I have never done publicly, but I want to do it because so many of them are sold out. So the first one was a book of alumni stories. It was called I Was There, Century of Alumni Stories about the U of A, 1906 to 2006. And in the Q&A, you can ask me why I start in 1906 and not 1908. It sold out a long time ago. It was published by the U of A Press. The second book was A History of Campus Maps, 30 some odd pages. It sells in the bookstore for $1.50. They did a huge print run, and I think there's something like 3 or 4 dozen books left. That's it. I just learned the other day that book 3, which was A History of the Faculty of Engineering, all their copies are gone. I don't know what the print run was, but it was a big print run because they offered it to the public and to their donors for free. I have 6 books left. That's all there are. So this fourth book, which is called Taking Care, Alumni Stories about the Original Residences and Lister Hall, is at the bookstore. I did a very limited run. So if you're interested in the book, you should probably get it sooner rather than later. So now we're going to go on from Reg to the next one. This is Ringhouse 1, right after it was completed, 1911 or 1912. And you can see all the workers there. There's an open veranda. And let's go to the next picture. So this is approximately, I think, the 60s. You can see the veranda has been filled in. And this later housed the art gallery, which Helen Glide Collinson was curator of, and latterly museums and collections. So next slide. Now this is Henry Marshall Torrey. You probably know something about Henry Marshall Torrey. His nickname was Marsh. Let's call him that because I think it makes him more alive. Ringhouse 1 is the oldest presidential residence in Canada. So if I could just say, to demolish it, I think would be a travesty. So Torrey, before he came to the U of A, he was going back and forth from Montreal to British Columbia, setting up transfer courses, which began UBC and which began University of Victoria. Then he comes to the U of A. Then during World War I, he starts the Khaki University, transfer courses for all of these men who are stuck overseas and can't get back home. So he had profs from the U of A go out and teach courses. He had universities in Europe teach courses. So many students came back. Hundreds of thousands of courses were taken. And after he left the U of A, he was the first chair of the National Research Council. And in his retirement, he founded Carleton University. But he was human. You know, if you look at these pictures, they're so stylized and they're so, you know, they don't really have any life to him. But Marsh and his first professors used to hop on a train on the weekends and they go out and they'd fish for the weekend and come back. He could apparently curse a blue streak. And I know that he cried after World War I was over at all the memorials where he had to read the list of the students who died. So he was a dynamo, but he was also human. Next picture, Marilyn. This is Annie, his wife. It's the only picture of her. And she was known as Auntie Annie. The Torreys apparently couldn't have children, as you can see from the little boy whose hand she's holding. she kind of adopted all those ringhouse children because there were children in all the other houses. So where she lived in Ringhouse 1 was a presidential residence until 1959. And then with the enrollment boom, it turned into Pembina House. From 59 to 64, it housed 16 female students. So there's a lot of history. There's history of other presidents, the Tory who lived in this house. It's, you know, when I walk by them, I don't see them as ring houses. I see them as people's homes. And even more so when you see the next picture, Ring House 2, which is a very special one to me. So there's Ring House 2, right opposite the faculty club. Now it's very interesting. I haven't realized that in this picture, but you see what's in the background. That's the Donadeo building, the new engineering building. So you can see like the new and the old juxtaposed there. Next slide is Muir Edwards. Now for a picture taken a long time ago, at the time Tories was taken, look at this picture. You can see a human being here in the eyes and the slight smile. Muir's mother was Henrietta Muir Edwards, one of the famous five. And he was a star athlete at McGill. He was first in his class in civil engineering. And the next slide, he coached basketball, which was new at the time. He laid out the first football field, taught students to play rugby football. He chaired the first students' council meetings, so students could then elect one of their own to run their organization. In 1910, guess what? The university was shut down. There was a typhoid epidemic. Thousands of people well, it's not thousands, many hundreds of people in the city of Strathcona died. So the university shut down. Muir goes to the sanitation plant and finds that the intake valve is drawing in raw sewage. So he fixes that, updates the sanitation, end of the typhoid epidemic. The city named a day for him a few years ago because of that. Then World War I comes. The campus is emptied of most of the men. And he comes up with this idea of having a comforts club, the only one in the world that we know of. So everybody gets together, knits socks, and President Tory, who had been ill as a child and bedridden, had learned to knit. So the women would turn their socks to him when you had to turn the heel. That apparently was the hard part of knitting a sock. So there's Tory again. So these care packages go overseas with hand knitted socks, fruitcakes, gateways, letters, and letters pour back to the university. So there was this tie, you know, with our students. And then comes the Spanish flu. And I'll just tell you the short version of the story. The city is shut down. The university is shut down. Pembina Hall becomes an emergency hospital and a morgue. And Muir volunteers to be the admitting officer and helps to nurse students. He contracts the flu and dies on his 39th birthday. Next slide. Leaving his family, Evelyn and 3 children. The youngest is in the middle there between Evelyn and I think you can probably see the dog, and her name was Joyce. I can't remember how, but I somehow got in touch with Muir's grandchildren in Toronto. There's another group in Vancouver. And I went to Toronto to meet Joyce. She was 99 years old. And her son, one of her 3 sons, Dr. Hugh Scully, who had been the most recent president of the Canadian Medical Association, said this to me on our way over to see Joyce. Said, Ellen, my mother goes in and out. She's probably not going to understand what you're saying to her. So be patient. So we get there. Joyce comes out of her bedroom, big smile on her face, doesn't say a word, sits down in the big cushy chair, doesn't say a word, motions for me to sit at the footstool so I'm facing her. She takes my hands in hers and starts rubbing my hands methodically, very gently. And I think, I'm not going to hear any stories from this woman, and I'm not going to get any photographs. So I thought, I'll tell her stories about her father. And I told her the stories I just told you. And when I finished, her eyes locked on mine. And she retold me the stories in the order in which I told them to her. Her son behind me was shocked. And I'm just getting the chills because it was, in all my years of studying U of A history, that was the most emotional moment for me, because here was a young girl who loses her father at 5, never hears any stories about her father. And I walk into her life by happenstance and tell her about her past. So that was an emotional moment. And if we fast forward, I'm also just going to let you know that Ring House 2 was later in the 50s, the home of the Van Fleet family. So most of you probably know at least the name of Maury Van Fleet. He was one of the first PhDs in Canada in sports and became the first dean of physical education here. There's a building named after him. He is an icon amongst the sports community. I know 2 of his children. They gave me stories and pictures for this latest book. I don't have time to tell you those stories, but they are absolutely heartwarming, detailed, funny, and it will give you a picture of the campus in Windsor Park, which was just being built at that time. Most of the family signed the petition. Hugh Scully signed the petition for his family. And the Van Vliets have all signed the petition as well. So next picture. This is a rare picture from 1913. And it shows what I think are ring houses 6, 7, and 8. Now these were 3 of the 6 houses that were demolished in the 70s to make way for Windsor Parkade. They were all designed by Cecil Burgess. That's another homework piece, Google him. He was a famous architect. He was the only professor of architecture at the U of A. And what I see here, well, you can see they're still being built because in the foreground, you can see a sawhorse. This was a neighborhood, and it was, you can see part of the circle or the loop or the crescent or the ring, and it was ring houses that stuck. So next. I was shocked when I found this, when I was writing the Taking Care book. It's an ad from the Edmonton Journal, and it mimics just what we're experiencing today. This disease is highly communicable. It may develop into severe pneumonia. And in small print, it says there's no medicine which will prevent it. Keep away from public meetings, theaters, and other places where crowds are assembled. So next slide. We know the campus emptied during this epidemic, but this, again, is a rare picture, probably 1918, of the Bowers children. Frank Bowers was the first librarian in the university, and right behind the pram to the right is a ring house 5 where they lived. Then I think you see 6, 7, and maybe a little bit of 8. And as an aside, I've always wondered if the Bowers had 2 sets of twins, because the youngest look as if they're about the same age, and the older kids also look as if they're about the same age. So next, Marilyn, I think we have ring house 3. Great, so ring house 3. I'm going to tell you a short version, a very short version of a story that's in Taking Care. It's about the smuggling of wine into the basement of Dr. Carr's house. Dr. Carr was the Dean of Arts and Science and later became university president. He happened to have the largest windows going into his basement. So his friend Edouard Sonnet, who was the first professor of French and full of life and loved wine, they were roping a barrique of red wine into the basement window, along with John McEachran, who was the provost in charge of enforcing the no liquor law on campus, and Billy Boyle, who was the first dean of engineering. And they did this in the middle of the night, so it's dark out. And who appears but President Tory from 2 houses over. So you'll have to read the book to see what happened, but it was I thought, a very funny story. Then I think next we have Dr. Carr. So it looks like it's Kerr, but it's Carr. I was told this by Marjorie Bowker. She corrected me in no uncertain terms, Dr. Carr. So Dr. Carr was one of the smugglers of wine, and I'll have another story about him a little bit later. There's another professor, his name's Adolf Lehman. He lived in Ring House 3, and I think also in Ring House 4. And I'll tell you about him in just a moment. So this house, and I think Lorene Turner is out there in the audience. She might want to talk a little bit about this at the end. So let me just first tell you, I heard from so many women who taught in this kindergarten. And if you read through the petition, there's one student after another who says, I went to kindergarten there. And when I grew up, I sent my kids there. Lorene Turner, Dorothy Howard, Sheila Robertson, Lynn Patching, Janice Blakely, all these people wrote pages to me about this kindergarten, which was in existence from 1969 to about 2010. And I'm going to read a few excerpts from Dorothy Howard, who's living in England, about this kindergarten. A visiting artist professor at an easel, working alongside children who were observing and trying his techniques or engrossed in sketching and painting. Aromas emerging from the kitchen as recipes from various ethnic backgrounds were followed and adapted. Imagination being sparked by a newly introduced literary work and budding writers compiling their own stories. Planting, tending, and harvesting a garden. A unique space creatively adapted to fulfill its intent and serve its population with excellence. I dream now that Ring House 3 will have a future, living not only in the memory of those who knew it during its history, as a place with a reputation for innovation and best practice in early childhood education, but as an important, integral, and continuing part of the University of Alberta. I thought that was such a powerful statement about this kindergarten. I'm sure most of us used to pass it and see the kids playing outside. So there we are. And this was later home to graduate students of engineering, Helen, and also home of University of the North. So when you hear that the houses, let's demolish them, they've had a recent life of the research and teaching aspect of the university. So next. Ring House 4. I have learned so many stories about Ring House 4 in the last week or so. So let's take a picture. Let's take a look at the next picture, which I found in the 1959 yearbook. Oh, no, sorry, this is Adolf Lehman. We'll do him first. So Lehman apparently lived in 3 and 4. Here's a story about Adolf Lehman. He looks like a pretty door guy, I had a friend for many years during his 1990s named Bill Kent, civil engineering 1932. Bill told me that he had an eye injury as a kid. Then there's an outbreak of measles on the campus, and his doctor says to him, you have to take a year off because if you get measles, you will lose the sight of your eye. So Bill and a friend ride the rails to British Columbia, which means they're traveling underneath the cars, hanging on for life. They rent a room with one bed. They take turns working at a fruit factory and sleeping in the one bed. Then when they came back, Bill takes his makeup exams, hasn't studied, passes them all except for chemistry. So he's walking out of the registrar's office in the arts building, and who's there but Dr. Lehman? Lehman says, are you Kent? Yes. You didn't do very well on your chemistry exam. Lehman says, you're going to take any more chemistry? No. He said, you're not going into chemical engineering, are you? No. And he says, you pass. Okay, so if any of you are involved in grading exams and the appeal process, it's not that easy nowadays. So let's look at the next. So there's Ring House 4, and the next one is from the 1959 yearbook, a famous physicist, son of H.G. Glide. And if you have a pen and paper, you should write that down, because if you don't know who H.G. Glide is, Google him. Famous painter. His son, Henry, known as Hank, here he's called Racy Glide, was seen as one of the top 10 runners on the continent. So I've just made contact with Dr. Glide. And I'll just tell you, he said, I don't think people are going to be interested in personal stories about the ring houses. He phoned me back the next day and he said, you know, I've thought about that. And he told me stories about growing up. And then he said this. He said, I think the most important thing about the ring houses is that the president was there and most of the deans were there, all men. And he said, you know, we socialized. Our parents socialized. The children played with one another. And they would have these informal meetings talking about the future of the university. Are we ready to offer a PhD in this course? Should we hire somebody in this field or that field? And I think his point was that that was the beginning of collegial governance on this campus in this small neighborhood. He's a very interesting person. Let's take a look at the next slide. This is one of his paintings. It was painted in Rosebud, Alberta, where he spent a week with A.Y. Jackson painting. And the next two, if we can just show them, are some of his other paintings. He was the first chair of the Department of Art. And his sister, some of you may have known, was Helen Glyde Collinson. She was the curator of the art collection for some years. Isn't that just beautiful? Wow. Okay, so let's take a look at the next one now. Okay, this picture has always fascinated me. That's Andrew Stewart in the middle with his wife. We don't know her name. I could find that out. And 6 children living in Ring House 1. All these kids have signed the petition. And I'm just going to tell you a brief story about Andrew Stewart, as told to me by Racy Glyde. Racy Glyde's father and Andrew Stewart were in the back of a car. Bill Carr, who was the Dean of Arts and Science, was driving. They were driving from Calgary to Banff. And Andrew Stewart, who apparently was quite a fastidious person, who's very popular with the students, taps on his watch like this, and Bill Carr is driving at 80 miles an hour. And from the back seat, Andrew Stewart said, I can't be late for this meeting, Bill. Could you step on it? So can you imagine back then, a small road where they're going 90, 100 miles an hour? To me, that put a personal face on Andrew Stewart. So, so Stewart was president from 50 to 59. That's when presidents stopped living in the house, and Alumni House was built shortly after that. And next is an aerial from 1942. Now, is it possible to scroll that down? Because what I want to talk about is up at the top of that. I don't know if that's possible. Okay, so let's say that it's not. Then you're going to have to go buy a copy of that maps book for $1.50, because this was the first place that this was published. And I'm just checking time. I'll just tell you, when I did that maps book, there was a gentleman in what is now Facilities and Operations who had rescued a whole bunch of maps like this from the garbage. And that's how I got hold of this. Up at the tippity top, when you see this, you'll see a grouping of houses. They all have like white exteriors. That's the very beginning of Windsor Park. And just further down from that, you can see where the ring houses were located. And it's kind of fun to look at these maps and figure out what's what, but it will tell you in the book. So now we have just 4 slides to flip through. And we'll stop at the first one, because I'm not sure you know this, but last week, Canada's National Trust put the 4 ring houses on their endangered places list. And that went out on Twitter to their 20,000 members. I know the Chancellor got it. I'm sure others at the university got it because they sent out a press release. So there's House 1, and next is Ring House, that's Ring House 4, and next is Ring House 4 again. All 4 of the ring houses are on the endangered places list. So, you know, I would say, as I said at the beginning, you know, I'm hopeful about the houses. I understand that one of the 38 people who submitted a letter, an expression of interest, was found that it would cost $250,000 to move the houses. So if people have that kind of money and they're thinking of moving them because they want them saved, it's not that they want them demolished, they want to move them and save them, then there may be some hope.